Welcome to this religious community where we affirm the worth and dignity of all who enter. We gather in community, understanding we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, identity, and theology. Our values invite us to a shared journey of truth and meaning-making. Together, we foster a spirit of gratitude and generosity so that all may feel welcome and all can thrive. We are glad you are with us this morning. Please enjoy our prelude, Aria by Felix Mendelssohn, performed by Alan Hoffman.
Good morning. I am the Reverend Kim Mason. I use the she, her, hers pronouns, and I serve this congregation as your minister. The theme for June is freedom. I invite you into worship with these words from Lorraine Botorf McNeil. Today is Father's Day, a day in which we honor and offer gratitude for our fathers, in whatever form or fashion they come into our lives. Biological fathers, stepfathers, adoptive and foster fathers, grandfathers, spiritual fathers, and all of the uncles, brothers, and friends who, whether they know it or not, have helped to fill the role of father in someone's life. We are shaped by their presence and their absence, by how they choose to act and when they abstain, what they say and when they remain silent. Let us remember today and always the impact that these people have on us as individuals and as a community. And let us also remember that this relationship is not one-sided. We as a community are called to support and empower the fathers of the world, no matter how they come into our lives and regardless of their successes or failures. Let us raise up their triumphs, and let us have the grace to forgive them when they prove themselves all too human. Let us love our fathers and each other. Come, let us worship together. I invite you to rise as you are willing and able and join in opening hymn number 148, Let Freedom Span Both East and West.
Today's chalice lighting comes from Karen G. Johnston. Gathering together grows courage. These things add up. Your one thing, and my one thing, his one thing, their one thing, and her one thing. Any liberation, all liberation, is collective liberation. My freedom is bound with yours and yours with mine. We light this chalice for our collective liberation.
Are there any young or young at heart who'd like to join me up front for the story? Okay. All right. Our story, I gotta take her. Yeah. Good morning. How are you today? Thanks for coming up. So I have a story about a farmer. We're not going to have any pictures today. So if you want pictures, you're going to have to close your eyes and imagine them in your head. Can you do that? Excellent. Good job. They're thinking very hard. So there once was a farmer. And this farmer was quite old and quite ill. And he thought he was going to die soon. He had lived a very long life. He really enjoyed being a farmer. And his only regret was that his 3 children were lazy and argumentative. What do you think about that? You think they're very dumb? Maybe. They might be. Let's see. Well, maybe their dad was very clever. You see, he had this farm that he loved. There were lots of plants and animals and buildings and land, enough to support all of his children and their children. And he had worked so hard because he wanted to leave this farm to his children. So he thought really hard about what he could do. So one day he called his children into his house and he said, "My children, I have accumulated a great fortune, and I want to leave it to you." And his children said, "Oh, wow, thanks, Dad. Where is it?" And he said, "Well, I worked really hard, and I hid my fortune away because I didn't want anybody to know that I had it because I was saving it for you. But I hid it. I hid it somewhere out in the fields. And I'm old, and I kind of can't remember now where I put it." Do you think that's true? You don't think that's true? Well, he never told his children where the fortune was, and a few days later, he died. Now, his children were very sad. They did love their father very, very much. And in their grief and sadness, it brought them together, and they stopped fighting. And as they were remembering their father, they said, Dad said he was going to leave us this great fortune. Maybe, if he can't remember where it is, maybe we should go looking for it." And one of the other children said, "Well, he said he put it somewhere out in the fields. He must have buried it. We should go dig it up." And unfortunately, this was a really long time ago, and they did not have metal detectors. So, anybody know the story Holes? You might watch that movie before too long. Well, it was kind of like Holes. They went out in the field with their shovels, and they started digging. Yep, just digging. They dug and dug and dug for days, holes everywhere. And they didn't find anything. Yeah, it was a lot of work. And so as they sat there exhausted, one sibling said, "Well, we haven't found that great fortune. We must have missed it, and I'm done. I'm done with digging right now. So, tell you what, it's springtime, and we've dug everything up. We might as well plant some crops." Seem like a good idea? Yeah. So there we go. Sorry, cut out for a minute there. So they planted the crops, and once the crops were there, they went ahead and tended them, and then the fall came, and they harvested all the crops, and they stored them away for winter, and things were good. And as the land went fallow for the season, they said, maybe we should start that project again about finding all that fortune. So back out they went with their shovels, and they dug, and they dug, and they dug. And what do you think? They didn't find anything. But once again, it was springtime. And so once again, they said, might as well plant some crops. And then again, fall came, and they harvested the crops just like the year before. And this continued in this pattern for several years, digging and digging and digging, finding nothing, and then planting and harvesting. And well, they were doing well enough at that point that each of the siblings got married, and they started families, and they lived on the land, and they made enough money to support each other, and they grew strong from all their work, and they were healthy and happy. And one time when spring came and they had once again gone around and dug up everything they could think to dig up, they realized that maybe that great fortune that their father left them, well, what do you think it was? Not real at all? A whole bunch of nothing. Well, it turned out that the fortune he had left them was the love of the land and the farm that would support them and their deep and abiding relationships with each other. And the weird feeling to have to dig a bunch of holes. But the true fortune was being together as a family. Now, we don't all have farms that our parents might leave us, but each parent leaves us something, a legacy. It might be a favorite item, it might be a home, it might be a pair of shorts. It could absolutely be a pair of shorts. I have my mom's leather jacket. But it might also be something about how you think of the world, or a habit of going to church, or your sense of humor, or some family recipe that's been handed down generation to generation. We don't have religious education classes today, so I'm going to have you go back and sit with your dad and think about what are some of the things that you get from him or any of the other fathers, uncles, stepfathers, adoptive fathers, brothers, and what we get from them, their legacies in our lives. Hello, there we go. Each week, we bring our joys and celebrations, sorrows and concerns with us into this community. When we share our burdens, both happy and sad, we build community. Now is the time in our service when we connect with one another by sharing our sorrows and concerns. This week, we grieve the loss of Quintus Bud Drennan, who passed away on June 2nd, 2025. Bud was honored just last year for being a 60-year member of the church. The family held a private service earlier this month. In our community, we send healing prayers for a sister undergoing surgery. We grieve the death of a friend. And we worry about the rise of politically motivated violence. We hold these concerns with tenderness and compassion. May they be lighter because they are shared. As a community, we also share our joys and celebrations with one another. This week, we celebrate with Sarah Dashner and Steve Miller, married 40 years today. Woo! We congratulate the Reverend Noemi Tamasi, minister of our partner church in Shakfalva, who is being ordained today. Church member Robert Kokanyesi brought greetings and himself and gifts for Reverend Noemi. We send gratitude to congregants who demonstrated for the soul of our country yesterday. And we are inspired by so many people showing up at protests all over the nation. We hold these joys with gladness and celebration. May they be magnified because they are shared. With many joys and concerns remaining unspoken in our hearts and minds, please join me in a spirit of prayer and mindful attention with words adapted from Amy Jones. Spirit of life and love, holy within and among us, on this Father's Day, we take a moment to hold all that may mean to us. We grieve with those who have lost fathers, and for those fathers who have lost children. We acknowledge with gratitude non-binary, transgender, and cisgender dads. Dads in families made of two dads, foster and adoptive dads, single dads. We lift up fathers of color and those fathers raising children of color in the persistent battle against stereotypes. We remember fathers kept apart from their children by borders and war. We lament the fathers and children who have lost connection, children disowned or abandoned, and bless the father figures who step in. We hope alongside those longing to become fathers. We wonder with those full of questions about their biological fathers. And most importantly, we hold up and thank all the dads, the papas, the daddies, and all who father, showing up every day to give their all to the children who need them. Relationships are complicated. Days of recognition are complex. Breathe in what serves you, and breathe out what does not, so that on this day you may find the peace you need. So may it be. Amen, and blessed be.
Our first reading is Duty by former poet laureate Natasha Trethewey. When he tells the story now, he's at the center of it. Everyone else in the house falling into the backdrop, my mother, grandmother, and uncle, all dead now, props in our story. Father and daughter, caught in memory's half-light. I'm too young to recall it, so his story becomes the story. 1969, Hurricane Camille bearing down, the whole house shuddering as if it will collapse. Rain pours into every room, and he has to keep moving, keep me out of harm's way, a father's duty to protect. And so, in the story, he does. I am small, in his arms, perhaps even sleeping. Water is rising around us, and there is no higher place he can take me than this, memory forged in the storm's eye, a girl clinging to her father. What can I do but this? Let him tell it again and again, as if it's always been only us, and that when it mattered, he was the one who saved me.
The First Unitarian Church of St. Louis strives to be a welcoming congregation, inspiring lives of kindness and integrity, by nurturing spirituality, building community, and advancing justice. One of the ways we do this is by sharing the plate. All non-pledged donations received this morning will go towards the Elmer Hammond Child Development Center, a near North Side St. Louis neighborhood child care and development center serving 2 through 12-year-olds. Their program serves as a resource to assist low and moderate income families in the mental, physical, and educational growth of the total child. Your generosity this morning supports their mission of serving St. Louis families. This morning's offering will now be received. Thank you, Tom. For all the gifts of fathering on this Father's Day, and for your gifts this morning, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to go home and hug my kids now, if they'll let me. This morning's second reading comes from the Reverend Jay Wolin. Forgive me, dear Father, for all the trouble I caused, the missed curfews, the missed classes, your unfulfilled dreams for me. Forgive me, dear Father, but your dreams are not my dreams. Forgive me, dear Father, and I will forgive you for missed moments that you sacrificed so that one day I could follow my dreams now. Forgive me, my son, for whatever errors I have made. Forgive me, my son, for what I did not know, now that I've sacrificed so that one day you could follow your dreams. May all of your failings from generation to generation lead one day to wisdom, but until then, we will always have love. Maybe that is wisdom enough.
There is an iconic story about a father and son. It goes like this. There once was a young boy, about 6 years old, and one day his father gave him a gift, a brand new hatchet. I'm not sure we give 6-year-olds hatchets anymore. The boy was very proud of his new hatchet and ran about chopping down whatever he could find. One day in the garden, after a happy hour of swinging at his mother's plants, he noticed a beautiful young cherry tree. Just to see what would happen and what his hatchet could do, he swung it against the bark of the tree with a powerful stroke. The hatchet was new and quite sharp, and the boy's blow strong enough that a deep gash rent the side of the tree, whereupon it split open and fell. The next morning, the boy's father went out into the garden and was shocked to find his favorite cherry tree dead on the ground. Angrily, he came back into the house, shouting for his son. When the boy appeared, he questioned him, "Son, do you know who cut down the cherry tree?" The boy, trembling, did not want to make his father any angrier than he already was. He pondered his predicament, settling on an answer. "Father, you know I cannot tell a lie. I am the one who cut down the cherry tree." At his son's clear honesty, the father's anger melted right away. "Come here, boy." And he knelt down, opening his arms. "You have paid me 1,000-fold with your bravery. Your honesty is worth more even than 1,000 trees blossomed with silver and fruited with gold." Who recognizes this story? Yeah, of course you do. If you grew up in the United States, you were taught this story as a child. It is one of the foundational myths of this nation, George Washington and the cherry tree. When I say myth, I hope it comes as no surprise to anyone that this story is fictional. The story of George Washington being so honest that he could not lie to his father about a youthful mistake was created by his first biographer, Mason Locke Weems. Weems wanted to create an image of Washington as someone who achieved success through personal values and principled choices. The website for Washington's home, Mount Vernon, explains, The cherry tree myth and other stories told readers that Washington's public greatness was due to his private virtues. The cherry tree story is what is called in narrative therapy a thin story. Alice Morgan, in her book, What is Narrative Therapy, explains that a thin story, quote, allows little space for the complexities and contradictions of life. It allows little space for people to articulate their own particular meanings of their actions and the context in which they occurred. Thin stories are often created by someone else, even if or when the subject of the story accepts the narrative as true. The goal of narrative therapy, then, is to bring out alternate stories. Stories, as Morgan describes, of identity that will assist people to break from the influence of the problems they are facing. Alternate stories, or thick stories, are often crafted by the person themselves and contain rich details about motivation, situational context, thought process, individual history, and personal relationships. So George Washington and the Cherry Tree is unusual as a thin story because it portrays Washington in a positive light. Many thin stories assign negative attributes or dysfunctional characteristics to the person in question. However, it is an equally damaging story, as it paints one of our nation's forefathers with a single broad brushstroke. So perfect, he was literally unable to lie. Additionally, it draws an image of a father so kind and magnanimous that he forgoes any punishment in the light of his child's moral perfection. The simplicity, the thinness of such a story does a disservice to sons and fathers, children and parents everywhere. It doesn't let Washington or his father be fully human, with both virtues and flaws. Every family has a collection of thin stories, both positive and negative. These thin stories often develop a life of their own, used to both push and pressure, as well as limit and hold back. These stories are the family lore about what kind of people you are, your shared skills and traits, the history of academic achievement and career trajectories, what is acceptable or expected. Take, for example, Frank. Frank is a real person. I've just changed his name and identifying details. As a child, Frank played baseball until one day his father told him he was a terrible ball player. Frank stuck with baseball for another year, but every time he was on the field, all he could hear was the words, "terrible ball player." Eventually, he stopped playing baseball, at which time his father determined that he was a quitter. Frank decided then that he wanted to take up karate. And his father pressured him to drop out before those fees were due so that they wouldn't waste the money when he inevitably quit. As a teen, Frank got a job, but his father questioned if he would stick it out all summer long. Before long, Frank got tired of always being doubted. He hated the thin story that he was a quitter. So he decided to prove his father wrong. Whatever he took on, he gave 110%. Not only did he never quit, he overcommitted, saying yes to whatever came his way until his junior year in college when he suddenly found himself in desperate need of a therapist. Frank was trapped in a thin story. Many of the elements of today's service are of people trapped in thin stories. The story for all ages about a father whose children are lazy and argumentative. Natasha Trethewey's poem about a father saving a daughter. Jay Wollen's poem about failings between fathers and sons. Harry Chapin's famous song about sons and fathers not having enough time for each other. These are beautiful and heartfelt, but ultimately thin stories. In her essay, Silence is Broken, author Rebecca Solnit writes, "We are our stories, stories that can be both prison and the crowbar to break open the door of that prison. We make stories to save ourselves or trap ourselves or others, stories that lift us up or smash us against the stone wall of our own limits and fears. Liberation is always, in part, a storytelling process, breaking stories, breaking silences, making new stories. A free person tells her own story. A valued person lives in a society in which her story has a place." Had Frank been able to tell his own story, he might have shared his hurt at losing baseball. Had Frank been able to free himself from the thin story of being a quitter, he might have been able to say no to some of those opportunities that came his way. Had Frank's father looked at the evidence of real life and not his perception, at Frank instead of his projection of Frank, he might have freed himself from the need to constantly monitor, question, and judge his son. Had Frank's father been able to free himself from the thin story of Frank being a quitter, then there might not have been a reciprocal thin story about Frank's father not supporting him. Fathers and sons, daughters and fathers, for all the thin stories about children, like Frank and his father, there are just as many thin stories about fathers. Just as parents have expectations of their children, children too have expectations of their parents. In his book, Fatherhood, Augustine Sedgwick describes how ideas of fathering and fatherhood have evolved over time. In an interview for NPR, Sedgwick said, "Across time, fatherhood has been created as this kind of godlike paternal mandate to protect and provide. What's interesting about this is that men, of course, are not gods." Sorry, guys. Therefore, men, time and time again, find themselves in crises of masculinity, of fatherhood, because they have defined these ideas in terms that are effectively impossible to completely guarantee and fulfill. He continues, "I think men would make their lives better if we could understand that fatherhood had been invented and that it had changed over time, and that it could be remade again." Sedgwick is describing a process by which we thicken thin stories of fatherhood by releasing made-up standards and allowing a varied and diverse portrayal of fathers to come into being. When we resist the quick judgment of thin stories, when we allow details to fill out and thicken stories, we make room for the wondrous humanity that exists in all of us. Whether or not they are correct, thin stories are not the whole story, the complete story. Thick stories have contradictions and conflict, multiple viewpoints and numerous right answers. Thick stories require discernment and time, openness and acceptance. Thick stories can't promise easy answers or quick solutions. What they do promise is authentic relationships. Relationships where we can connect with one another and ourselves. If we are to honor the inherent worthiness of each person, then we all deserve the full story, a thick story. We started this morning with a story about a father and a son. That son, George Washington, was one of the fathers of this nation. As the first president, some even consider him the father of the nation. Thin stories about Washington and his compatriots do a disservice not only to individuals seeking examples of complex and complicated people to learn from, but also to our nation. We live in a complex world at a complicated time. I will not put adjectives or superlatives on that statement because plenty of other times in the history of this planet, in the history of this nation, have been complicated. And the world has always been beautiful in its complexity. The problem is that when we create thin narratives about who those founding fathers were, the decision they made, the actions they took, we lose valuable insight into how we might resolve the conflicts and contradictions of our own time. Additionally, when we allow thin stories to become the story, we get stuck. We become imprisoned in how things are supposed to be rather than how they actually are. When thin stories become the story, whole people get lost. Take, for example, colonization. The story I was told in school was that white Europeans came to a vast, unsettled land. But there were Native Americans already here. Just because the Native American way of living was different than the Europeans doesn't mean the land wasn't settled. Stories that only glamorize past victories without also naming the losses. Stories that only highlight past greatness without also acknowledging failures are thin stories that ignore the lived realities and very real struggles of many in our nation's history. Media, particularly social media, rely on the simplicity of thin narratives in order to tell a specific story, to canonize one story as the story. In an effort to simplify, thin stories lack detail and insight. And in their thinness, their sparsity, lack honesty. The Broadway musical Hamilton, say that 3 times fast, about another one of our founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton, features the song, "Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story?" which literally asks, who tells the stories of history? The old adage, of course, is that history is told by the victor, in which case the story told is most often a thin one. In an article for the Broad Street Review, essayist Michelle Chicken-Onda points out that this question of who tells your story is a call to do the work of recognizing the familial histories, generational narratives, and societal constructs shaping your life. Thin stories about our nation are being used to shape a narrative of whiteness, power, masculinity, and superiority that fail to reflect the true history of how we got here. Our forefathers were real people with complicated lives, attempting to create something that had never existed before. They both succeeded and failed. They both defied kings and defended slavery. Our history deserves the complexity of a thick and detailed story. The work then is to resist thin stories, to thicken the narrative, to make space for all of the story. Or maybe I should say stories, because we each have a story. You have a story, and you have a story, and you have a story, and we all have stories. So who tells your story does not have to be me or you, writes Chika Onda, but rather can be me and you, the result of the intentional work to make space for each other. Making space for each other starts with making space for yourself. Showing up in full, not as a socially determined solution of what an ideal self in your ideal relationship looks like, but the truth. And only then do you get a genuine answer to who tells your story. Showing up in full means admitting that George Washington was a liar. Not in a bad way. He was a master of military deception. But clearly, that man could fib. It means that after many long years, Frank's father came to recognize that rather than being a quitter, Frank was actually a serial overcommitter and a workaholic. It means Frank had to admit that in his deepest struggles as an adult, his father showed up, literally in person, to lend a hand. And it is also, like our story for all ages, when 3 children trapped in a thin story about disagreements and laziness discovered that through collaboration and hard work, they and their families could thrive. Our task is to consistently and persistently call for the thick story, both in our personal lives and in our nation. We need complex and complicated narratives about our fathers and forefathers, if only because it helps us better understand who we are now and what brought us to this point. To wholesale discard portions of the story is to cut off a piece of us as individuals and a country. Thick stories about our fathers and our forefathers, our parents and this nation's founders, give us the freedom to review old narratives about who we are and envision new narratives about who we can be, to revise old stories about who we have been and write new stories about who we will be in the future. A thick story contains a diversity of perspectives that includes everyone. A thick story is grounded in practices of equity as a path to belonging. Thick stories teach us lessons from both the mistakes and the successes of life. On this Father's Day, may you be released from the limits of thin stories and find in your heart the rich reward of a thick and detailed story. Please rise as you are willing and able and join in our closing hymn, number 357, Bright Morning Stars. Our closing words come from the Reverend Leah Angiri. May we give thanks for the fathers, papas, pop-pops, dads and daddies who represent for us the steadfast presence that holds us in love and launches us into the world. May our gratitude for the good and the healthy be a balm for the places of pain. And may it point us in directions of more truth-telling and more healing, more love and more connection on Father's Day and on all other days. Amen. Blessed be, and go in peace. Please stay for the postlude, and then as it ends, as your final act of worship, please turn and greet your neighbor.